It's been a long road, but we have finally arrived at Dead Space 2. Developed by Visceral Games and published by EA, Dead Space 2 released on the 25th of January 2011 for PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC. And it released to overwhelming critical praise, netting a Metacritic score of 90%, which puts it as the highest rated survival horror from the 7th generation of consoles. And for me, it's always been regarded as my favourite entry in the entire series. So going into this experience, I was brimming with anticipation, with childlike excitement. I played the game on its release, and after several playthroughs at that time, I haven't been back. Now, memory is a strange beast. The passing of time can distort events, leading to assumptions which may not necessarily be true. My memory paints DS2 as a game which raises the action from the first game, and this has caused some trepidation on whether this increase in pace would erode any tension and atmosphere which the first entry had created so flawlessly. Well, I had no reason to worry. Over the course of this review, I'm going to detail how Dead Space 2 blows all of my expectations out of the water, how it raises the bar that came before, and cements itself as one of the best video game sequels of all time. As always, I'm going to split this into plot, gameplay, and presentation, and it's worth mentioning, I will cover spoilers for the original Dead Space, so if you haven't played it and you don't want to know what happened, it's worth coming back to this review after playing it. For the Dead Space 2 spoilers, I'll include timestamps to help you navigate around them. Now let's dive in. The year is 2511. 3 years have passed since the events on board the USS Ishimura, and we find Isaac Clarke detained in a hospital ward. He is awoken by Franco Delisle. You may remember him as the protagonist of Dead Space Ignition.
I don't want to remember nothing. Nothing. You understand?
It's here that Isaac learns he's on the Sprawl, a massive space station built on the remains of Saturn's moon Titan. But where have those 3 years gone? And why can't he remember anything? Before he has time to ponder these questions, all hell breaks loose around him. Franco is turned into a necromorph and the entire ward descends into chaos. A morning jog later, escaping the kind of horrors that would make me chuck myself out of the airlock, Isaac is freed from his straitjacket and realises the run-in with the marker has left more than a lasting impression on him. And it's one that many of us have experienced in our lives. Everywhere he goes, he has a run-in with his ex. Now, that's a living hell for any of us. For Isaac, it's even worse. Nicole died aboard the Ishimura, and what he's seeing is the manifestation of the marker's influence, a living embodiment of his guilt. And when Dinah Le Guin promises to help him get rid of these visions, he jumps at the opportunity. Joining him on this adventure are two accomplices, Ellie Langford, a CEC pilot caught up in the madness overtaking the Sprawl, and Nolan Stross, a senior science officer who underwent exposure to the marker on board the USG O'Bannon, causing him to suffer with the same psychotic delusions as Isaac. With the pair's help, Isaac sets out to destroy the marker on board the Sprawl and end the outbreak for good. Dead Space 2 follows in the path laid out in the original Dead Space, relying on a host of audio logs and written documents that help expand on the world, filling in the stories of recently deceased characters that now litter the Sprawl. They are just as effective as the first game, feeling like essential pieces of lore, rewarding you for your exploration. And when matched to the environmental storytelling of the Sprawl itself, the marriage is one made in heaven. Isaac, this time around, is an active participant of the Sprawl's descent into anarchy, and as such, you see the horror unfold all around you, from witnessing patients mid-operation begging for you to release them before death approaches, to empty apartments where the Unitologist faithful have taken their own lives in readiness for the Ascension. It's horrific, and the more you learn about these areas and the people that until recently lived there, it elicits a feeling of sorrow, where you are left pondering how unwavering commitment to what is essentially a suicide cult could be mass adopted. I suppose people want something to believe in, and when coupled to a conspiracy story of government cover-ups, the appeal becomes that much more palpable. Now, speaking of Unitology, it may have been introduced and peppered throughout Dead Space 1, but here, in Dead Space 2, the lore is expanded greatly. Hell, we even get a chance to go on a tour of a Unitologist church, which starts off fairly normal at first, but the deeper you go, the more nefarious it becomes, just like the religion itself. It shows how members are psychoanalyzed to determine their likelihood of indoctrination, and how the elite are frozen underneath the church in readiness for ascension. Exploring this location was a real highlight for me. It fuses a church and a museum, and juxtaposes this with an almost theme park level of money grabbing, which felt both absurd and yet fully rooted within this world. And that's what great environmental storytelling does. It gives you glimpses into things that, on their own, would feel abstract or jarring, and meshes them together to flavor the environment to make it feel lived in, and in this case, horrific. To see moments in people's lives and how they have come to an untimely end, either through their own choice or the choice of others. Moving away from the environmental storytelling and barreling directly into the narrative itself, Dead Space 2 makes one change from the original, and it's one that was extremely welcome. Our boy Isaac has found his voice. No longer is he a vessel for the player to project themselves onto. Now, he's a fully realized character, one racked by guilt over Nicole's fate and battling the PTSD inflicted on him by the marker. Throughout the experience, it's Isaac's personal journey of confronting this trauma and overcoming it in the face of ever-increasing turmoil. Having Isaac take control of the plot, to become an active instead of passive protagonist, was the smartest choice Visceral could have made. To see Isaac's reactions when the helmet comes down, to hear his pitch, cadence and regret singed into every syllable during his conversations with Nicole as he fights off the marker's influence and comes to terms with what he's done. It invests you into this story, and you root for him to overcome the odds. The first game was the Ishimura's story. This is very much Isaac's, and everything told through the environment and pickups is icing on the already masterful cake. It's an improvement on every level. Now I'm going to move this into spoilers to detail one last piece of the pie that makes the Dead Space series so unique. So if you are keeping this spoiler free, skip ahead to the timestamp shown. Dead Space 1 and 2 omit a traditional antagonist. In DS1, at a stretch you could say it's any number of people, Dr. Mercer, Kendra Daniels, but really they are pieces of the plot, but not the driving force. DS2, you could say the antagonist is Dinah, but she is gone by a quarter or so in, so that leaves Hans Tideman, the man responsible for managing the sprawl. Now I always remembered this guy as an absolute dickhead. A guy who pops up throughout the story to either try to kill Isaac or to shut down his momentum. A guy who eventually gets his comeuppance at the hands of our main man Isaac. Now after playing it through for the review, it turns out I was totally wrong about him. Hans Tideman is actually a hero.
You're shitting me. I'm not shitting on you.
Sure, he was aware and participated in the creation of a new marker, trapping Isaac and the many other participants in their own hell for years, and yes, if it wasn't for those experiments, the outbreak wouldn't have had a chance of happening. But his intentions were good. Unlimited power to put an end to planet cracking. Okay, I'm not making this seem even, am I? Alright, well, how's this? Isaac saves one person, Ellie Langford, and that's in the entire game. And even then, she half saves herself. Tideman is responsible for the population of the Sprawl, which is around 1 million people. He goes against his orders and issues an evacuation. Now, if we even lowball it and say 1% escape, that's 10,000 people. Isaac did 1. And Hans is polite. He's always apologising when he goes to kill you, and that goes a long way. Alright, I'm clutching at straws here. But Tideman isn't the bad guy I thought he was. He has shades of grey. He's ignorant, yes. Evil, no. The true nemesis in the Dead Space series is the marker itself, and the millions under its illusion brought about by the Church of Unitology. And in both of these games, you have people acting for those goals, but never a central figurehead. Now, if you compare that to, say, another survival horror franchise, and we go for the biggest one, Resident Evil, the big bad for the majority of the series is Umbrella, but your main villain is Albert Wesker. He's the guy pulling the strings for most of the entries. He's the person you love to hate, the face you identify with as the cause of your suffering. Dead Space, up to the point of Dead Space 2, has had 4 different entries, and we still don't know who runs the church, who is responsible or financing this entire operation. We don't know. And it's that mystery that makes the game so appealing. We are dealing with Isaac versus an entire belief system, and one that is predicated on an unknown alien race which needs dead matter to create a convergence event, where everyone can be whole to do the marker's bidding. It's so much more than a mere man, and that's what makes it feel so daunting. It's not like taking down one person or one company will make everything right again. Here, in this universe, it's on a much larger scale, and holding any one person to account feels like a fallacy. After all, with the sheer power the church holds over the public, would anyone believe or even care about what happened on the Sprawl? That's what makes the series so impactful to me. Tideman may be an adversary, but he's not serving the wider big bad. He's doing his own thing for his own reasons. And this nuance seeds the ground as the starting point for the wider conflict between EarthGov and the church. Isaac is a man stuck in the middle of all of this, playing cleanup while one side seeks to catch and the other kill him. It's levels of depth which stick with you long after the game ends, as you try to piece all the individual parts together, and one where you can't wait to learn more about the world itself, to see where it's going to go next. The levels of depth added with this entry add more questions the deeper you go into it, and it's in this mystery that creates so much intrigue. And that's why I'm glad it forgoes installing someone as a figurehead, as a true antagonist, as moving against a belief is far more engaging than a physical threat. If you haven't guessed it by now, the plot of Dead Space 2 succeeds on every level. It builds on what came before, showing us extra peeks behind the curtain, but never giving enough away to ruin the mystery that underpins the franchise. It focuses instead on Isaac, on his mental battle following the events of the Ishimura, turning him from a husk we project ourselves onto to a fully realised character, and backs this up with an ensemble cast which complement the experience. It's a game of scale, where the stakes are raised, but it never becomes verbose. What makes a sequel great? It's a question which many game developers don't seem to know the answer to. For every Uncharted 2, you have an Overwatch 2. But in my personal belief, what makes a sequel great is understanding what worked so well before, staying true to that, but focusing it through a new lens. In the case of Dead Space 2, it shares many if not all of the core gameplay loops I spoke about in my Dead Space 1 video, but elevates the experience with a bigger, more bombastic approach. Think of it like Alien to Aliens. You take the same enemy, one we are acutely aware of, and you make more of them. To offset that, you arm the heroes with more firepower than they know what to do with, and then surprise them with fresh new forms and higher personal stakes. Aliens is my favourite movie of all time, and I have to believe that Jim Cameron's masterpiece must have played some inspiration into how to up the action without diluting the experience. In researching online, Visceral's goal this time out was to make DS2 more appealing to a wider audience, and they would do this by introducing action elements and making Isaac easier to control. But what's here is far more than that. If you look at the base combat, on the face of it, it's identical. You fight necromorphs and kill them by shooting off their limbs. Your resources are limited, but by exploring the environment, it gives you the opportunity to find ammo, credits, and nodes. Credits can be used in the store to buy or sell items and weapons, and the nodes are used to upgrade your arsenal or unlock doors which contain blueprints for new items and a host of goodies. It forces you to partake in an in-game economy where you're unsure what you should sell, what you should buy, and if you should pump those extra credits into more nodes so you can become a deadly force against the seemingly unending waves of necromorphs. It seems familiar, right? Well, this is the base experience in Dead Space 1, and that triumphantly returns. So how have they built on this to ensure the experience doesn't feel like one we've taken before? Well, the first major change comes with Kinesis. In the original, one of my only complaints was how useless Kinesis felt. It was mainly relegated to puzzle sections which are solved at first sight. Using it in combat was like signing your death warrant. Here, in Dead Space 2, it becomes invaluable. The damage inflicted by a pole or a slasher blade is catastrophic, and there's nothing more flashy than mowing down one enemy, ripping off their blade, and hurling it at the next target. It never gets old. And it's not just the damage either, it's fast. Objects don't slowly work their way to you. Now, they snap into you so quickly that I even had fun throwing harmless objects just to torment the hapless bastard that dared to cause me a jump scare. The next change comes in the form of zero-G areas. In DS1, you'd aim at a section of the environment and jump off, floating to your destination. It worked great, and I didn't know I needed anything different in my life until I turned into Iron Man. I completely forgot this existed, so when I took off, I had a shit-eating grin on my face the entire time. It meant that no longer do you have to reorient yourself on where your threats are located after taking off. Now you can fly into the abyss and rain hell down on your enemies, and it enables levels of verticality and scale to the handful of times you need to do puzzles. It's simply outstanding. Now, speaking of scale, this added mobility option gives Visceral a chance to go all Uncharted 2 on us, by providing breakneck sequences where Isaac boosts through the air, dodging debris or blasting back down to meet up with his comrades. These sections are intense, visually stunning, and are peppered in at just the right moment that they feel like a fitting crescendo. Now, with all these changes, you have the potential to make Isaac overpowered, or at worst, destroy the atmosphere, turning it into nothing more than an action game. But that's not the case, and it's mainly down to the enemies themselves. The first game introduced us to a host of necromorph types, each serving its own purpose, which, when combined into groups, are extremely formidable opponents. Its sequel raises this with a further 8 types. Now, I won't talk through all of these, but the ones that truly stand out are the Pack and the Stalker, both having very different roles to play and both eliciting wide-eyed terror. The Pack are children, and there are fucking loads of them. They go down easily, but they are quick and seem to come from everywhere. You have no choice but to run, reposition, unload, and watch your arse. The first encounter with them is harrowing, but this is soon escalated as you move through a school and realise you haven't seen numbers like this before. You need to know your arsenal strengths, their weaknesses, and which tools are suited to the task at hand, as one slip up and it's GG's. The game has multiple encounters with them. Sometimes you're given room to wiggle, to move, and others you're in a small enclosed space darting the camera in front and behind you as you struggle to contain control of the situation and create space. Juxtaposed to this are the stalkers. They sneak around the environment to get the drop on you, peering out around and above cover before finally making a mad dash at you, causing severe damage if they ever get close. After their first appearance in the church, you soon come to realize when you're going to do battle with them. The environment is designed to accommodate them, and it never fails to put you on a knife edge. You feel the pace drop to a crawl as your heart rate begins to rise. You fire blindly, hoping to get a lucky hit, all the while hearing them squawk and shuffle all around. And when they finally burst out with a blood-curdling screech, you need to be hot on the stasis and ensure you got something big enough to take them out quick. I adored their inclusion so much. I never found them a cakewalk, even right near the end of the game. They demand your attention, your respect, and there's not a feeling quite like hitting one with stasis when they're stuck to cover and beating the living shit out of them. The beauty in the combat of Dead Space isn't so much about a single enemy type, it's how they all work together to challenge the player. Across the approximately 8 to 9 hour runtime of the game, the sheer variety of enemies and groupings of them ensures you can never relax. They can burst through or jump from the scenery at any time, and as they pose a real threat, it creates tension that never fades. Oh my god, this creature's everywhere! Ah! Oh! Oh shit! Oh shit! Ah! Ah! Get me in the lift! Oh fuck, are you serious?
Oh shit! I didn't think there was anything down here.
As you can tell, I found myself on edge for the entire experience. And that is remarkable. For most survival horror games, the more you encounter enemies and the later the experience goes, the less fear there is, as the power seems to swing from the enemies to you as you use your knowledge and an expanded arsenal to dish out retribution. In Dead Space 2, it's not like that. You may be more powerful, have more resources, more tools, but the challenge scales perfectly alongside it. Incredible game design doesn't happen on accident. It's a balancing act, and that's what Dead Space 2 does so well. The amount of ammo the enemies drop is just right. The damage they do is fair. And when you make a mistake, you know it's on you. How you played the encounter, the choices you made both in and before the battle. You need to get better, to learn and try something different. And it gets you doubting yourself. Did I prepare enough at the store? Or did I get overzealous with upgrades and not give myself enough ammo to get the job done? Thanos put it perfectly.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Now when it comes to taking this challenge on, DS2 brings back the classic arsenal from the first game and introduces a few new ones. Now I've always been a sucker for the plasma cutter, assault rifle and ripper trio. Joining them for the coveted 4th slot was a tough choice, as now you have access to a javelin gun, detonator, rivet gun, and a seeker rifle. My favourite out of these is easily the javelin gun. This gun kicks ass. Necromorphs hit by this thing ragdoll through the air and become nothing more than wall decorations. And with its secondary fire, the bolt embedded in an enemy spits out lightning which can take out multiple threats at once, adding to its versatility in combat. Now, I'm not saying the other guns don't have purpose or aren't effective, it's just personal preference. And with the added choice available here, you have the ability to shake up multiple playthroughs or even just dabble between them to find the one that really suits your style. And that's never a bad thing. Now, speaking of style, let's talk about the suits. In the original Dead Space, you'd find schematics and use them to upgrade the base suit. Now, this would change Isaac's appearance, adding more visible armor to the design, increasing damage resistance, and the number of slots available for your items. Dead Space 2 does things pretty much the same. However, the differences in design and the benefit the armor provides vary drastically. Some are just a steady increase in slots and armor, just like DS1, but others provide additional damage for selected weapons, store discounts, or make the hacking minigames easier. And I have to tip the hat here. The design on these suits are nothing short of beautiful. The suits themselves are found across the environment, completing different difficulties or completing Dead Space Ignition, if you really want to do that. I generally cared more about how they looked compared to their benefit, but I bet on the higher difficulties, you want to use any advantage you can to make your experience that little bit easier. To me, the way they are included here is a natural evolution on the first game, and it's another element of choice and player variety that I am grateful was included here. Now, unfortunately, not everything can be a hit, and I have two areas which I wish were expanded on a little more. They are very minor issues, but I feel it's worth raising them here. The first is the breakable windows. At various points of the game, you encounter amazing vistas peering out onto Saturn. Now, if you notice a small triangle above the window, it means you can shoot the glass and suck all the enemies out into the vacuum of space. Seeing a host of necromorphs fly out the window as you slowly approach the abyss is extremely cinematic. You need to react fast to shoot the seal to save yourself suffering the same fate. But the issue I have here is it feels there's hardly any opportunity to use this mechanic. Now, I'm not saying I want it all the time, but at only 4 times across the game, it doesn't rise to become anything more than a cool gimmick. And I wish their inclusion could have been more realised, to make you scared to blind fire at the risk of getting decompressed any time you're around windows. But who knows, maybe too much of a good thing would have ruined the pacing if you're constantly getting sucked off.
Come again?
The final issue I have is with the hacking. Now, throughout the game, you have to engage with this minigame whereby you move your analog stick until it vibrates and lights up blue, hit the button, and well done, I guess. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just there. Now, in Dead Space Extraction, they handled hacking brilliantly, as you're having to do it while fighting off hordes of enemies. This makes it extremely tense, and even though it's a piece of piss on its own, the added pressure elevates it, whereby you find yourself making stupid mistakes time and time again until you finally compose yourself and crack it. The only time it's done well in DS2 is due to the pressure of an approaching threat late into the game, and so unfortunately, outside of that one glimmer of greatness, taking part in the activity is generally tedious. Now, to come away from a game with only 2 minor critiques is testament to how great Dead Space 2 is to play. It's a game that builds on what came before and elevates it with greater threats, bigger moments, and more choice for the player in how they approach combat. It may have upped the action, but due to its constant tension, it never loses its fear factor. Now, when it comes to evoking fear, it all comes down to the atmosphere, and so it's time to move it onto presentation. Fear, dread, foreboding. 3 different feelings that many games try to elicit, but very few actually manage to achieve. And to keep that feeling consistent across an entire game is extremely rare. Dead Space 2 manages this effortlessly. Now, we all experience emotions in our own way, so I can only truly explain my own reflections on how this is achieved so effectively. It all starts with the music and lighting. Jason Greaves returns as composer, bringing the same organically scaling flair as the original. The quiet moments create a sense of mystery and underlying dread, where the environment around you breaks through the silence with distant screams, nursery rhymes, or at its freakiest, the sound of rustling through the many grates all around. It gives you a chance to slow down and soak up the audio logs, to breathe in the environmental storytelling, and when it kicks off, it kicks off. The music swells, sharp strings stab, and deep bass booms as you fight tooth and nail. Listening to the score away from the game, there isn't the same catchy themes that early survival horror utilized to characterize its areas. It takes a different role here, staying just beneath the surface, choosing to play an additive to the atmosphere, rather than a key character of it. It never distracts, and it never disappoints. The lighting too is extremely similar in Dead Space 2 as the original. Light spark, flicker, burst, and work in tandem with the scenery to bring smoke, shadows, and various other environmental effects to life. The big difference this time is the environment itself. The Sprawl, being a space station compared to a single ship, gave Visceral a golden ticket to make the environments as visually distinct as they want. From shopping malls to the mines of Titan, everywhere you go feels unique, and at the same time connected to the world. And it's in this variety that you never get a sense of comfort, as you never know what's around that next corner. Now, there's one exception to that rule, and it's one I need to move into spoilers for, so please feel free to skip ahead. The Ishimura. It had been 3 short years between Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2, and in that time, the planet Cracker had burrowed into our minds, making it one of those rare gaming locations that becomes a character in its own right. I remember when I first played the game, I'd only finished Dead Space 1 a few short months before Dead Space 2's launch, and even with that short time frame, the ship had left such a lasting impression that the mere thought of entering it again put the fear of God into me. The apprehension I felt as I walked through key locations was palpable. I could cut the tension with a knife. And then, nothing. You slowly relax, before that lapse of judgment comes crashing down around you and you fight to contain your bowels. What a genius idea. To not just give the player a throwback, but to also show just how important reclaiming the ship and the marker are to the UGC and the church. It's a perfect set piece, on the same level as returning to Shadow Moses in MGS4, or Burial at Sea in Bioshock. It's one of those moments that you hardly ever see in video games, and when it's done as effectively as this, I can't help but look back on the memories and smile. When it came to playing DS2, I chose to play it on my PlayStation 3. The reason for this is, well, I don't own an Xbox, and the idea of playing any game on PC always puts the fear of God into me. The PS3 outputs the game at a solid 720p at 30 frames per second. Now, this is exactly the same resolution and frame rate as DS1, but unlike its predecessor, it doesn't suffer from frame drops, and the character models and environments are much more detailed. It's a noticeable improvement, but goddamn did it get me cursing EA for not re-releasing it on modern consoles with 1080p 60 FPS support. Now, the biggest difference between DS2 and the original is in its presentation. For the most part, it's similar in terms of its HUD and its world design, where diegetic design is key to the experience, but where it differentiates itself is in its set pieces. The game is far more cinematic than its predecessor, and it's not just through the characters you meet and their interactions with Isaac, it's more so the scale. the actions that you take, and their conclusions. The ride you go on is breakneck pace, and it never stops for you to get off. They say bigger isn't always better, but here, in Dead Space 2, it certainly is. There's so many moments I could talk about here, from the hellish eye exam to the HAL 9000's killer AI. It's a game full of twists and turns, where at any point it could descend into over-the-top insanity, but it never does. It stays grounded in its world and ensures, as a player, you never know what you're going to get into next. It walks a tightrope yet never falters, never slips. It's one of those rare experiences when you finish, you realise you've played a masterpiece. Dead Space 2 is the gold standard of sequels. It took what came before and managed to improve on it in nearly every way. From a likeable cast to abhorrent enemies, it deepens the Dead Space world and yet manages to craft a personal story of guilt and loss that works on every level. Normally, by raising the action you dilute the horror, but here, that couldn't be further from the truth. It deserves its spot as the best survival horror of the 7th generation, and to me, it's one of the best of all time. Dead Space 2 is as impressive today as it was on its launch, and my only wish is to see it come to life on PlayStation with a HD liquor paint. EA of all people are leaving money on the table, and I don't understand why. But if it's been this long, I'm sure that my wishes will go unanswered, and I'll have to wait for the inevitable remake in a few years' time. If for any reason you haven't played Dead Space 2, I implore you to find the time to experience it. You won't regret it. And that's it for this review. If you enjoyed it, put a like on it and subscribe to the channel for more Dead Space content. Let me know your thoughts on the game. I try to respond to everyone, and I'll look forward to discussing it with you. Up next, I'll be reviewing Motive's Dead Space remake, so I look forward to seeing you back here soon. Now if you're still craving a bit more from me, consider checking out my podcast In PS We Trust. It's a PlayStation podcast where we crack a few beers and discuss the latest news, rumours and hype for all things PlayStation. You can find it on all podcast services, as well as right here on YouTube. I'll have links in the description. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.